I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee of the City of Palo Alto for Tuesday, November 15th, 2022. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Koo? Here. Mayor Burt?
Here. Councilmember
Philsteth?
Here.
For the record, all present.
Thank you. And I'll be substituting for Councilmember Du Bois, who is traveling outside the country at the moment. And we have two items scheduled for this evening, but we have an agenda change, which is that item number 2, which is the Staff and Utility Advisory Commission recommendation on the resolution amending the electric hydro rate adjuster rate schedule, that item be deferred to an upcoming date as a result of staff needing to update the recommendations based on current market conditions. And do we need a motion to approve the agenda change? No. Okay, great. So our one and only item is approval of a construction contract with Anderson Pacific Engineering Construction in the total amount of $161,846,000 and approval of 3 amendments to existing agreements with Stanford University, East Palo Alto Sanitary District, and the Mountain View and Los Altos. And then subsequent to approval of amendment to a contract with Brown and Caldwell for to add services, increasing their compensation to $1,484,000 and change, and to a minimum contract of $5.9 million, and then an amendment to a contract with Carollo Engineers to add construction management services to increase compensation to $8,237,000, and approval of a resolution to increase the California Water State Revolving Fund financing to $193 million, and approval of a budget appropriation increasing revenue and expenses, and approval of an exception to the debt policy for secondary treatment upgrades. That's a lot, but it's a very big, important project. So, Director Eggleston, are you kicking it off?
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Finance Committee. Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works. I'm here tonight from our Public Works team with Jamie Allen, our Plant Manager, Karen North, Assistant Director of Public Works, Tom Kapuscinski, Senior Engineer, and remotely also with us, we have Carrie Del Baccio from our program management firm, Woodard & Curran, as well as other staff from ASD who are here to back us up. I wanted to say this is a little bit of an unusual item for a Finance Committee review. This secondary treatment upgrades project has been part of the CIP since the long range facilities plan about 10 years ago for the Regional Water Quality Control Plant. It's been part of the CIP for years. There have been multiple approvals of design contracts and program management contracts by City Council. And just to note, typically the kinds of actions that we're asking the Finance Committee to discuss tonight would be things that would go to the City Council on the consent agenda. But this is a very large project at a total cost of $193 million. It also involves issues around cash flow and the city's debt policy for enterprise funds. So given the magnitude of the project, we wanted to have this opportunity for a discussion with the Finance Committee before bringing it to Council. And just also note that regardless of the motion from the Finance Committee, we do intend to bring this to the City Council as an action item rather than on consent, also given just the scale of the project. So with that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Plant Manager Jamie Allen, who will walk through the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Finance Committee. I have a brief presentation, some time for questions and discussion. Next slide. So this is a review of the things that you're approving that Mayor Burt just read out loud. The last 3 items cover more issues for the debt than the loan. I'm going to give a project overview just so you have a sense of it. This is our treatment plan. It's highly constrained site, 25 acres, surrounded by office park, wetlands, Baylands Airport, Bixby Park. The secondary treatment system is highlighted there. We're going to be retiring the 2 towers, the fixed film reactors along Harbor Road, and doing more process intensification inside the aeration basins, which is our secondary treatment unit process. The key project driver is aging infrastructure. This is just a couple examples of 40 to 50-year-old equipment that's, at its useful life or beyond its useful life and in desperate need of repair. But I also wanted to let you know about another driver, which is the nutrients that are in the bay. These are the 38 treatment plants that ring the San Francisco Bay, and you can see Powell out there on the lower South Bay along with Sunnyvale and San Jose. We all contribute nitrogen to the bay. Next one. It's about 50,000 kilograms per day, and the green circles there show the relative contribution from the various treatment plants. We contribute about last month 2,200 kilograms a day, which is about 4.5% of the total baywide load of nitrogen. 65% of the nitrogen is from wastewater, 20% from the delta and agricultural runoff, and 15% from urban runoff like stormwater. And so we contribute the nutrients that in the right climatic conditions, when the winds are low and there's a lot of light penetration into the bay, algae can feed exponentially on the nitrogen that's there. When the wind's blowing and it's more turbid and the light doesn't penetrate, there's no problem. But as you remember from this past summer, there was the red tide. And so all the treatment plants, all of us collectively as a Bay Area population are contributing to the nitrogen that can push the bay to a tipping point. So next one. The Regional Water Quality Control Board has been on this for some time, and we've been funding science in regional watershed permits. In 2019, we increased the science study. We continue to monitor and analyze sort of empirical analysis of what's the right thing to do. And they've been establishing load caps for us, a ceiling of how much nitrogen we can put in. Next one. And then we expect in 2024 that this load cap will be, if there's no, before another algae bloom, we would have this load cap in our next permit. And because we're an early actor, we won't be punished for doing that. And this project is making us an early actor. If there is an algae bloom, next one, they will come out with specific load reductions for nitrogen for plants that have not done anything, and that's not going to be us. So that's another secondary driver to support reduction in nitrogen to the bay. This shows an aerial view, 3D view of kind of what is going to be intensified inside our 4 tanks. You see a lot of equipment there. That's the majority of the work, but there's also power distribution centers, a new generator, sludge pumping stations to move the sludge around to support secondary treatment. There's new aeration blowers that move air into the tank and provide oxygen to the microorganisms that are breaking down the various pollutants, and some site work. These photos kind of give you an idea of some different areas to show you the industrial equipment that's going to be replacing the old pumps and aeration equipment. Next one. These are some pictures of the pump stations. And next one. And the aeration blowers, 500 horsepower, 500 horsepower aeration blowers, an electrical room. The construction contract, you had approved design back in 2018, and we've been working on design. This year we issued bids with construction contractors, and we received 3 bids on October 6th. And now we're coming to you for approval of that construction contract with final approval December 5th. After contract execution, we would start in early 2023. And due to the complexity of the project, moving from 1 tank at a time, it's a 5-year construction project with the first loan payment about a year thereafter in November 2028. And the low bid came from Anderson Pacific Engineering Construction at about $162 million. The bid spread is very tight, about 3.5%, separating the low bidder from the the high bidder, which was Flatiron West. That's a testament to the very good contract documents we have and a very good understanding of the project by the three bidders. It's also a sign that we would not benefit from value engineering and rebidding. The engineer's estimate was about 119 million, which was 36% lower than the Anderson Pacific's bid price. And I have some reasons for why we think that they were low. In general, and this is based on discussion with the engineer and the contractor and bidders, supply chain issues, high inflation, local market volatility. It's very difficult to predict prices, especially on a project that's almost 5 years long. They mentioned the complex staging and limited site access that we have at our 25-acre site, and then the geopolitical events affecting fuel prices and uncertainty for the future. And then we analyzed the bid against the engineer's estimate, and they were low by about $42 million. And across the board, they were low on all the different things that have materials and labor. For example, concrete was estimated at $150 a cubic yard. It's kind of running around $200 a cubic yard. And by the 5th year of the project, they think it's going to be about $300 cubic yard. So just Brown and Caldwell and their estimators couldn't keep up with the high inflation, and that affected it. Brown and Caldwell, the designer, were increasing their contract by an amendment and also extending it to March 21, 2028, a few months after completion of construction, bringing it to 5.9 million. On construction management, we had 5 pre-qualified construction management firms and received 4 proposals. Carollo Engineers provided the best solution. They also had the lowest price by quite a bit, which was also good. And so last night, council approved an amendment number 1 with them for providing construction management services, also the same contractor, Anderson Pacific, which is going to be useful to have the same contractor and the same construction management firm for coordination. So this is the second amendment to bring the total up to 8.8 million. And this is a summary to show you how we get to that 193 million total project cost, 178 million for construction, 0.6 million for program management with Woodard and Curran, 8.2 million for construction management with Carollo, and 5.9 million design expense with Brown and Caldwell. And then our partner agencies have been very supportive of this project. This is the share of the $193 million loan. Remember that Palo Alto is 38.16% of the fixed capacity share, and the other agencies pick up about 62% of it, with Mountain View being the next largest share. And East Palo Alto Sanitary District Board approved unanimously on November 3rd. Mountain View is approving tonight on consent. Los Altos is on consent in 2 weeks to approve the amendment. And Stanford we're awaiting a signature from a vice president. The budget is $149 million in the adopted fiscal year 23 capital budget. And we need to increase that with the budget appropriation to match revenues and expenses to the 193 million. And then the state has approved up to 169 million. And of course, we don't want to proceed without our financing in place. So the state has agreed to increase the financing from the 169 million that we had requested in our application up to 193 million, and they keep the interest rate at 0.8%. So it's a fixed locked in rate. That's the lowest rate the last 12 years. And the current rate, if we had to rebid the project, would be 2.1%. A revenue bond would be 4.5%. And this slide kind of shows you with this excellent, I know it's like the largest project in city history by dollar amount, but it's an excellent interest rate, 0.8%. So we'd be paying about 89% of our interest, of our debt payments is principal, and 11% is interest. If we had to go with the revenue bond, it's like an extra 137 million in total cost. And if it was rebid with the latest SRF rate, it's another 40 million in interest. So that kind of leads into the debt policy exception. You approved a debt policy in April 2017. And it's set for enterprise funds a debt limit of 15% of annual expenditures unless council approved an exception to go over that 15% debt limit. And so we're requesting an exception for just the wastewater treatment enterprise fund. And we mentioned this last year at finance when we gave an overview of our capital program. This slide shows kind of the history of our debts to our annual operating expenses, whether actual or forecast, and it's run between 4 to 9%, 8%. Between 4 and 9%. And as we expand our capital program to replace this facility, it's going to get to 30% in 2029 when the first debt payment, fiscal year 29, when the first debt payment on this project kicks in, along with one other project. And as you recall, these facilities were built in the 60s and 70s with federal construction grants. And then as time's gone by, we have to get different financing because there's no grants really available. But the SRF program is really good. And this is some of the justification for exceeding the debt limit. It's not a policy set by like an outside government financing organization. It was set by you. So that it's like give you a pause to ask, like, should we be going over this? And so we think this is a good time to let you take that pause. But we think it's good to go over it. We're not going to affect the general fund bond rating. We have sufficient revenue to cover the debt service. Some agencies use a debt coverage ratio. SFPUC is 1.1. Silicon Valley Clean Water is 1.2x. Debt coverage ratio. Central San is 2x, but we're going to drop to 2.4x, so we're higher than that. Other agencies are also seeing their debt coverage ratios decrease as they do big capital programs, but we're consistent with other agency policies. We think this SRF financing is the best financing option available. It is a very large, complex capital project. We don't think pay-as-you-go would work for this kind of project. The beneficial life of the assets will be equal to or greater than the 30-year term of the loan, and it's basic infrastructure required by the state. And so I looked at where we would be in 2029, and this shows you the principal and interest for the various loans. That the ones in red are still forecasted, and we'll update the budget numbers in our upcoming budgets. But the overall average principal is 79% of our total debt payment, and the overall interest is about 21%. And so most of this debt payment is principal. And so of that 30% debt limit, 30% of our total budget being debt, it was more like 5 or 6% that's interest, and the rest is principal. That if we had to come up with that on a pay-as-you-go basis, it'd be very difficult. And then the cash flow issue, I'm going to switch over to Carrie, the panelist. With Woodard and Kern, we've identified a particular issue. You can go to the next slide.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, this issue doesn't have an action tonight. It's something we're bringing for information, but the SRF program that Jamie just described is very beneficial. One challenge with it is that it's paid on a reimbursement basis. It does not provide a line of credit during construction. And so what this means is that when the city gets billed by the contractor with an invoice, the city has to process it, send that invoice to the state reviews it for compliance with the program, and then issues a check and mails that check back to the city for the amount of that particular disbursement request. And so the state makes no guarantees on the processing time for those disbursements. On average, we're seeing it take anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And as mentioned, the state does not use electronic payment, so they do this by paper check. So there's an extra week or two in there just for the mailing, production mailing, and then processing of that check. So what that means is that with the state turnaround times, we anticipate a cash flow issue with the wastewater treatment fund, given the size of this loan and the size of the anticipated contractor invoices during the construction process. This is a construction only issue. Once the loan has been completed and turned into those debt service payments, those are covered by the partners and by the city's revenues. So this is really just a construction phase issue. And so we've been working with staff to explore options to help mitigate this issue. You know, one thing that the city can control is how timely we are in the disbursement turnarounds between when the contractor provides their invoice and getting that processed and submitted up to the state. We are also looking at the ability to borrow between internal funds for the purposes of cash balancing. And then the city's treasury manager has been looking at bridge financing options from the city's bank. So these are future finance committee and council actions that will be discussed as needed at future meetings. I'll turn it back to Jamie.
And this is just a summary again of what you'll be approving, and it's time for discussion and questions and answers.
And if I could just add to that, to clarify, what we're actually asking for, of course, is your recommendation to the city council for approval of these items. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
No requests to speak and no hands are raised.
Okay. And colleagues who would like to kick off? Councilmember Phil Seth.
Yeah, what else can we throw in here for 0.8% a year?
I will say these mics don't seem to need us to be as close as our.
Although if I understand what you said, it's really probably a couple percent a year during the construction phase and then 0.8% a year after that. Because you're going to have to bridge for 6 months in the float.
The wastewater treatment fund as of June 30th had $13 million in cash.
Okay.
So we'll be able to cover
some of it.
Many invoices. Okay. It's just if they're taking, say, 4 months to pay back on $5 million a month, you know, and so that short-term cost is going to have to be paid for by the partners as an immediate expense.
So I assume that since this has been going in progress for over a decade, I assume that at least the original estimate, $169 million or something, whatever it was, is sort of baked into wastewater rates. Right.
Correct.
The $44 million difference, is that enough to move rates?
It's an additional $24 million over what we were sharing.
Okay. Are ratepayers going to see a difference in their bills? Is that big enough to make an impact?
I think it will have a small impact.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm sharing those numbers as we get them, and we just got the bids October, so.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I know that our utilities group is coming here. They were supposed to be here. We originally were planning on potentially coming the same night. So they are coming to the finance committee, I believe, in the next couple of meetings. Is that right? It's next meeting, the 29th. So they're going to talk about rates, and they're also looking at the collection systems in conjunction with the upgrades of the sewage treatment plant. So there will be an potential increase in rates.
But Councilmember Phil Seth, I'd also add to your original question. We've been discussing this project and that large cost and the need to build that into rates for several years with the utilities department.
Yeah. Really thinking about I assume really thinking about the change, the 44 million change, right? Which is, you know, a week old or a month old or something like that. Yeah. Okay. How long ago was the engineer's estimate?
Yeah, that estimate was generated in April of this year.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it was this year. So as recently as 6 months ago, we were thinking it would be 44 million less. Okay.
Vice Mayor Koo.
Just quickly on, the debt policy, and to use the debt limit exceeding the 15%, what are you proposing to go to?
It's estimated to be 30%.
Oh,
It could be a little more, a little less, depending on what our actual operating budget is in 2029.
okay.
And then as it goes on, it goes down from there, assuming operating budget continues to go up, because the debt payment's fixed and the operating budget tends to increase a little bit each year.
Also in the presentation, it says that we're waiting also for Stanford for the vice president to sign Amendment 8 is what is Amendment 8?
So Stanford originally had an agreement in 1935, and then it's been amended and restated a number of times. And I think the current agreement's from 1956, and there's been 7 amendments. And so this is the 8th amendment.
Oh,
and they've always agreed to pay for these capital projects. So we're anticipating that they will sign that. Since it's a larger dollar amount, it had to go up to a vice president. So that seems to be taking a little bit longer to get the signature this time around.
Thank you for that. I was wondering what was amendment. Was there amendment with them? But I get it now. And then when you say that perhaps, for cash flow issues, you might need to have a bridge loan with the city's bank. Aren't bridge loans pretty expensive?
Kylie, would that be one you could help us with?
Sure. So they can be, or cash flow loans, trans or other forms of those. And so we're simply looking at that to explore all options, to figure out what's the most cost-effective way and administratively easiest process. But obviously, we're not anchoring on that. Just making sure that we're looking at the full issue, internal service funds, our investment earnings, and those kinds of things as well.
Because it would be a shame to get the SRF loan at 0.8 and then end up with a bridge loan that ends up.
Yep.
Okay.
We will bring back the most economical solution.
I'm sure. Thank you.
Exactly.
Well, this is a project that we've been waiting to move forward on for a long time, and I'm really enthusiastic about both investing in this critical infrastructure that's overdue to have the investment, and the improved quality that I think the system will provide. I do want to say that the PowerPoint presentation was very helpful, and there's a lot of material in it that's not in the staff report. And so I want to encourage staff to get the presentation to the council in advance, because I think that's where they're going to digest this most easily. And then a couple things on the cash flow. Will the partners also have an obligation to participate in that cash flow obligation?
Correct. So if we have to borrow from a bank and there's a, $100,000 expense, let's say, they're going to pay their share of that. Like I said, that immediately that year.
Okay.
It's not going to be part of the financing of the loan.
So there's probably no way to rectify it now, but maybe there is to some degree, that we don't have the funds to float the state's payment terms. I'm glad they're not using Pony Express and only using snail mail. But for several years, I've raised the question going back to 2015-16 of whether we should be front loading funding for this with our partners to any degree. And certainly getting this state loan at 0.8% is phenomenal. And our ability to increase it, we believe, and still lock in that rate is great. But our rates, I think last time I saw an update, had been considerably below our neighboring agencies. And yet we had this on the horizon and we weren't front loading to any degree the funding for it. So if we were to increase our rates a bit more sooner, to what degree would that mitigate the need for the kind of bridge loans? Do we have any sense of that?
Carrie, can you speak a little bit to where we expect the bridge loan to be necessary? That would factor in.
Yeah, and I think what we really need to do is once the contractor's on board, we'll have their schedule of values and a discussion about when they're actually anticipating the payment. Right now, what we're just doing is projecting based on discussions with the design engineer of how they expect the capital outlay to go over the 5 years. But that's really an engineering guess, and the contractor is going to be the one who will best tell us when they plan to spend money. And so we'll update our analysis with that information, which is why this is a still in progress task.
But we've got a rate proposal coming in 2 weeks. If the rate proposal attempted to address the cash flow to some degree, we could actually, in theory, avoid some of this more expensive bridge loan. And so conversely, if we wait for the contractors, we'll lose another year's ability to do that. So why wouldn't we want to begin the process of upping our rates at this time, if not before now, to be able to have that cash flow in the construction fund?
I'll defer back to someone within city staff to answer the rate timing question.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to why we wouldn't want to do that. That's something we can discuss with utilities as we're contemplating those rates.
Okay.
I do want to say that I'm recalling that in our early projections, without the information Carrie was talking about, that we're thinking we may run into this situation late 2023, early 2024. So it isn't the situation where we have, say, 2 years to raise rates and build up those reserves. I think it comes on fairly early according to our initial projections.
Well, all the more reason to try to look at whether we can front load our revenue because, we're basically, we'd be saving our partners potentially on higher rates, interest rates if we did that. And one slide that I didn't see that I think will be very helpful. Well, maybe two things that I would recommend adding. One is how our wastewater rates compare to neighboring jurisdictions that have regional water quality control plants. My recollection is that they're still very favorable. And this was a backup slide if you wanted to see it. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and post that, and then I'd encourage that to be in the report, because when we look at a big dollar amount, everybody says, "Oh my gosh," and yet we've been incredibly competitive and below most of the other jurisdictions. I remember back in 2015 or 2016 touring the plant and going through this and thinking about even some of these partners that don't necessarily have a long-term obligation to stay with us, like we had on our pets, what we call our animal control center, and we lost a partner when we went to look at costs. And I'm glad that we're not in jeopardy of losing a partner, but we had partners who, could have stayed with us until as we were running the plant off of fully amortized equipment. And then as soon as we invest in the future, they could jump ship. That's not going to happen here, fortunately. But that was a risk that I was fearful of. And one of the reasons why I said, why don't we narrow the gap on our rates?
This is from October 2020, so it's a couple years old, but it's relative.
Wow.
Palo Alto in the $40 to $50 range. Sunnyvale just over 50 now, I think. And then San Mateo County is much higher in general, where many people are paying $100 a month. So yeah, San Jose is similar to where we are.
I think that's a really compelling graph, and it further makes me think that we should consider adjusting our rates to make sure that we're not paying through the nose on a bridge loan unnecessarily. Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the other strategies that the team is looking at is also acknowledging that, I think you brought this up, Mayor, that the other cities, our other partner agencies, also have cash balances. So is there some way for us to address pooling of those cash balances? Because once you pool them, obviously the cash flow eases. So I don't know. We're doing our due diligence to look at all aspects of this, but obviously I think have confidence that only if a bridge loan is economically feasible will we go there. We may look at interest loss by using interfund loan transfers to make sure other funds are not paying for that investment loss, or looking at the partners as well. So I do think, though, that your note is wisely taken, and we'll bring it back to the utilities team to make sure that as we're looking at our rates, we are considering at least doing what we can on our end to make sure that we are sufficiently.
And I'll just say that our ratepayers, in all likelihood, whether they be residential or commercial, most of them probably don't understand how competitive we are, and not just competitive, that we're basically half the rate of most other jurisdictions. We hear about this cost of doing business in Palo Alto, and you look at our electricity rates, a fraction of PG&E, and our wastewater rates, a fraction. Our water rates are high from Hetch Hetchy costs, but these others are incredibly low. And we don't really tell that story enough. And I really want to encourage us to get that out there, not just in this circumstance, but routinely, because the frequency at which we all hear from residents who assume otherwise is really something that hurts our residents and businesses' appreciation of the services we're providing and the cost for those high quality services, being very low cost at high quality services. Okay, so I'd really encourage that slide to be included in the deck. And then on the bids, similarly in the staff report, and maybe you have that in a backup slide as well, you showed that, we rightly are concerned that from April to now, we had this big increase in estimates from the outside estimating firm. And as much as I despite all these changes, we didn't have the inflationary costs have gone through the roof, and they didn't go up that much since April. So something is missing there in terms of how that was performed for us. But on the other hand, the staff report shows that other jurisdictions in the area, and I didn't see the time frame in which they went from their estimate to their actual cost, but it's even more severe a difference than what we've experienced. I'm trying to remember which page that's on, but
everybody else missed it too. So it says.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Everybody else missed it too.
Well, and we should actually show those numbers because they're really striking, and I would make sure that those get out there as well. And I'm not sure which page.
Yeah, I think I have the dates.
Okay. I thought I highlighted it, but if somebody can find that page, I think.
Page 7.
Thank you.
There were bids fished year 2023.
Okay.
Sunnyvale had an engineer's estimate of 150 million. Yeah. I just think estimators can't keep.
I think estimators can't keep up with the inflation, and there's so many little weeds in every estimate. And
well, keeping up, I agree with. Being off that much is striking.
I mean, there's some aspects where Brown and Caldwell was low.
Yeah,
we saw that.
And but it is reassuring to see that misery loves company. But it's reassuring to see that we were off less than these other agencies were off. It's striking.
The low bar. The good news is that the state is willing to increase the financing. Yeah. That's been the positive.
And then remind me on the share proportionality, because we had that slide that showed that, or maybe it was in the staff report. How is that calculated? Is that based on influent volumes?
Each partner wanted a certain flow capacity through the plant. And so that 1.6% relates to some number of million gallons per day of our design capacity.
It's a reserved capacity versus a current or?
Correct. It's reserve capacity. It's similar to the existing flow capacity.
Is it? And that's what I'm wondering, because I see Mountain View below us. Their population is higher, and now their jobs are comparable or higher in terms of total number of jobs. So I was wondering why their proportion is lower.
And they're at 37%.
Something like that.
Yeah, they're 37.
Yeah.
But
it's about the same. We're 38th or 30th.
But they're higher population, and I think they now exceed our jobs. And have we looked at out of the flow reserve that they and we have versus our actual flows? How do those compare?
Off the top of my head, it's hard to remember, but Palo Alto this past year was only 32% of the total flow. But I think in the years before that, they were like 35, 36%. And so Mountain View this past year went to 40%. But I think that's COVID pandemic things where businesses being empty and whatnot. Typically, it is closer to that 38, 37% within a couple percent. And it varies from year to year based on the economy.
Just to add one other note to Jamie's answer, I mean, you're asking about the capital cost, which is based on those fixed capacities. The operating costs are based on the year-to-year flows.
Okay.
Right. That's what I was sharing.
Got it.
That the year-to-year shares is not too much different than the fixed capital capacity.
But if they're now at 40%, so it may
just
be
this last year, just this 1 year.
Yeah. So the question is that an anomaly or a trend?
I think it's an anomaly based on the low rate commercial occupancy. That's my gut feeling.
Well, I'd love to see, and I don't expect to see it tonight. I'd love to see what those trends are, because I don't doubt that some of it is based upon the pandemic trends, but they have been growing drastically more rapidly than we have in both commercial space and employment and in residence. And maybe those new developments are going to be lower effluent per capita. I don't know, based on efficiencies that are built into newer construction, right? We're more efficient, and that the new development is probably so perhaps
they don't get off the hook. No one gets off the hook for that, because flow is 34% of the share, and the 66% of the share is the strength of the pollutant. So we measure that monthly.
Okay.
So everyone's paying for pollutant removal.
Okay. All right, but I just want to make sure on the capital proportion that we're looking at current trends.
You want to remind the mayor when the capital proportion was allocated and how long that's been in place?
Since 1988.
Yeah.
But if they've grown a lot more than us.
Right. We've never reevaluated it because our flow was very comparable. So it didn't seem to take this time to reevaluate it. So
no one wants to buy capacity or rent capacity. No one's in need of more capacity, kind of like on the water side.
Well, yeah, but no one wants to. But if we're paying for higher capacity than we use, and they're paying for less capacity than they use, nobody wants to, but we all need to have our fair share. So I'm concerned that we maybe haven't looked carefully enough at the proportionate capital shares. We don't have that data before us tonight to, I accept that at least a portion of that is attributable to pandemics, but my gut is that a portion has to do with growth, and that's continuing, and their growth, projected forward growth, is greater than ours as well. So I'm a little concerned that we need to make sure that they're paying their equitable share.
I don't disagree with you. It's just when we open up one partner agreement with Mountain View, then it's opening up all of the other ones. So
a lot of dollars.
It is a lot of dollars. It's just 5 partners. And so what we've done historically, and we'll look at it the last, 10 years, typically the numbers were equivalent to what the capital share was, because this is a question that we get asked pretty much every single time we go to council. But we'll look at it again. I think with COVID, things have changed in terms of flow. And we're not sure what will happen in the trajectory in the future.
Yeah, I get that.
And the capacity share is of a certain number of million gallons a day that the agency owns in the treatment plant. They own the capacity that they don't own the plant. And in the future, it's more pollutant limited than flow. We have plenty of capacity in the treatment plant for the flow. It's just that the pollutants will reach a point where we can't add any more pollutants.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Los Altos Hills, it noted was on a different agreement. That's why we don't have what's different about their agreement?
They're a small percentage of the total flow, and so they weren't given the right to approve.
So they have
projects.
just a pro rata based
they just
on
pay
flow?
whatever their share is. Yeah.
Based on flow?
No, it's a fixed capacity, but they don't we don't do an amendment with them to approve capital projects.
Well, and their growth is probably slower than Mountain View's as well. So they might have similar concerns as I'm expressing. Okay. Question on, there's a lot of concrete here. And we just adopted a low carbon concrete standard for the city. Is that incorporated in these bids?
I don't believe it is, Jamie or someone else from the engineering team. I think this design work predated the city's work on those standards.
Yes, that's correct, Brad. That provision wasn't even considered at the time.
Okay, so now we've adopted this standard. Is that something that we should be including? And maybe that's part of a change order, but that's a city policy now, right? When is it effective?
Well, it's effective January 1st of next year for projects that have a permit application submittal after that date is the formal way that works.
Okay. It seems that we've adopted this as a city policy. I'd hate to have a massive city-owned concrete project that didn't incorporate that environmental policy. So that may be something that we're going to want to incorporate into the project. Doesn't need a rebid because it could be a change order.
It's definitely something we can look into.
Okay. Two more questions. First, on the improved quality, you spoke about the nutrient levels. Are there other quality improvements on discharge contaminants? And are there technologies that through advanced sensing technology, what's different about the new system that improves our quality of discharge? And do we get improvements in addition to the nutrient improvements, whether those are heavy metals or whatever?
The denitrification process adds alkalinity back into the water, which improves, it reduces the need for supplemental chemicals. Alkalinity is not bad for recycled water.
So, and I guess I should have asked too, not only that suggests an operating cost improvement, reduction.
Slight, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that anything also that reduces our operating costs because it's more automated as well as higher quality. So are there any others that we think are part of the benefits of this?
We have more oxygen sensors for a more controlled oxygen profile through the tanks. And so that should lower, we won't be over aerating. Do you think of anything else?
Yeah, Jamie, well, the comparison on the oxygen with the way the process is being modified, we're looking at probably a 9% of reduced oxygen content in the system.
Or energy.
In the energy, I'm sorry.
Can we anticipate a lower copper?
I'm sorry, 9% lower energy use?
Correct.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And then also we do anticipate some of the metals will have a better removal because we remove more solids out of this process. So we do project it out. It will be interesting to see once it's completed what are the overall quality. It's hard to estimate it. Well, and it's going to be a 5-year project.
So I was just going to add one other thing. We're expecting that our settling will improve in our secondary clarifiers, which will also help improve the water quality going out to the bay.
Well, I think those are really important aspects. I'd encourage you to include that in the presentation, along with lower operating costs from greater automation. So you have a lot of advanced sensor technologies you had before. Does that simply make the system work in a more refined way, or does it also reduce any labor? It's all just quality improvement and perhaps chemical and energy reductions.
Yeah. We go from 4 oxygen sensors to 28. So there's more equipment to take care of.
But that just makes the system smarter and higher performance.
It'll be more fine tuned, but there's still work for our guys to take care of.
I think those are really important. Not everybody will dwell on that, but I think those are extremely valuable benefits to the project. And, I'd say too that our partner agencies, I'd want to make sure that their constituents understand the value of this investment on multiple fronts, including, when you say lower energy, that's a lower operating cost. It's also a lower climate impact. And so that's really great too. Last question. You're going to be doing a major construction project in a space that's pretty fully occupied. And we have a discussion that is coming back about what to do on the Measure E site, which was 10 acres, potentially for advanced environmental technologies. There's discussion is starting to occur on having 5 of those acres be dedicated to parkland and possibly 5 acres that could be for advanced environmental technologies, future sequestration. But my question is, if you had 5 more acres during this construction period, would that make this project more efficient to accomplish? If you weren't trying to fit it all in a tight space at the same time?
Jamie, well, my initial thought is it is a tight space, so any extra space would be helpful. I'll let Jamie speak to the specifics. I don't think we analyzed this.
We didn't look at that as a laydown area and staging area, but I'm sure the contractor would, we could probably negotiate a credit, I would think. They have that.
Yeah, as we discussed before, I mean, we're very tightly constrained on this site, and laydown areas is going to be a factor here.
Or even whether you would have, and I don't know that this would be the case, even certain parts of your permanent treatment area might be in the new zone, and the sequestration in the other, so that if it's sequentially, it's easier to build the new thing on one part of it. I'm not envisioning the whole thing on new space. And I've been involved in trying to do major projects while you're operating. That's really tough. And so that's just something that I'd encourage you to look at and see whether there are values to that, depending on whether it's a staging area or otherwise. So that's my long list of questions and comments, but unfortunately, I have some background in wastewater treatment and am interested in this. So just want to say I'm really glad we're moving forward, and to see that we're going to have a project that will not only modernize an outdated facility, but be more efficient and higher quality at the same time. I think that's something we need to make sure that our ratepayers, commercial and residential, understand. So thank you very much. And yes.
Just based on your questions, I came up with some myself. So I was going to ask, something that the mayor said about, partner agency and their estimates, right? And how really there hasn't been too much of a review. I was wondering if a policy would be needed in order to have so many years and take a review of it to see whether, the fair share is indeed implemented. I was just a question for my colleagues and for staff.
To kind of on some regular basis.
Yeah, just to
reappraise.
evaluate and to look at it. Thoughts? Or you're pretty confident that we are, everybody's paying
Can I
attention?
surface your questions? I think just to see if I understand it correctly, you're trying to see if there's a policy level decision that every certain number of years, maybe once a decade, we revisit the flow share allocation for the sewage treatment plant and make sure that we're all paying our fair share.
Yes, thank you for getting a succinct question out.
And I think in terms of, it's not so much fairness, but how much capacity does an agency want? Because if an agency wants X million gallons a day of capacity, that's what they wanted. And it's nobody else. The other agencies didn't.
They pay for that, but they don't.
They want their capacity, we want ours. So if we didn't want as much, it's on us to determine whether we really want that much capacity, rather than to say it's not fair that they're say Mountain View is, I can't remember, 12 million gallons a day of capacity, and they're using 9, 10, 11, and their share is growing. But they're using within their capacity. If Palo Alto's at 12 MGD and we're using 6 million gallons a day, we've got this buffer, that's our choice to have that surplus.
That's on the operating side.
And the fixed too.
Oh, and the fixed too.
Yeah, it's for, you grow up to your capacity that you own.
So population growth and their growth in terms of a city doesn't have anything to do with capacity.
Oh, it does.
Yeah, and that's the point I wanted to add. I mean, I think Jamie basically said it, but on the operating side, it's based on the actual flow and strength characteristics of the water coming in. These, capital side debt service issues for these projects, these are based on the capacities that these agencies, including Palo Alto, have determined that they want to reserve as the potential to actually have those flows coming to the plant in the future. So I think it's an interesting question to look at those recent trends, Mayor, as you had suggested. But another aspect of it that's even beyond that is, what do we want to hold as potential capacity in the future?
Okay, like the urban water master plans, they have population projections, so we're consistent with those.
Oh, okay.
Well,
so,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Kyle Ariano, Assistant City Attorney. It is in our work plan, I would say, for over the next year to revisit the partner agreements. This is something the auditor mentioned and we had already been working on. So take that as our homework to include in that review a study or analysis of what the appropriate capacities are for the various partner agencies. Just to add to the technical point of the discussion, a huge component of cost and what flow amounts are is the respective collection systems in the agencies. And that plays a huge role downstream at the treatment plant. So depending on how these agencies are building out and maintaining or not maintaining their collection systems, that also has a very big impact on how much they are eventually sending down to our treatment plant. And so it's a lot of moving pieces.
Okay. Well, that's reassuring. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'll just add that this intersects with our water efficiency plans and our neighboring cities. New development is low flush toilets. We're on the horizon. We're probably going to even see in terms of other appliances like washing machines and dishwashers that are much more water efficient and not just more energy efficient. I don't have a sense of what that future adoption of new technologies 5 and 10 years from now will have on the growth rate of capacity needs versus our historic growth rates, that when we add a worker or add a resident, we were historically adding a certain amount of anticipated growth or seeing a certain amount. And that should change for the better. We actually, when we look at our trends over the last 20 years, certainly I've looked more at the water consumption side, which includes irrigation to a great degree, and getting rid of lawns and things like that. But on the effluent from our businesses and residences, I don't know how much that's been changing per capita and what we project going forward, which presumably it will be even less effluent per capita. It's certainly on the new development.
It's the flow rate right now is about half of what it was 25 years ago. So
that's good news. That's really,
and it hasn't hit the bottom yet.
So please include that also in your PowerPoints. I think that's in most of it. I certainly, I've been interested and I didn't know it was that significant. I think that's a really informative piece of information and a positive one, including on, but
the pollutants keep going up,
right? The concentration,
because concentration.
We're not treating just water, so that's the main thing.
Absolutely,
these
and we know that when we looked at our basic recycling and where we could use that water, we had hoped to get our TDS down to around 600 so that we could expand our use of recycled water. And we found that particularly in drought periods, concentration in is resulting in, with the same process, a higher concentration output effluent than we have in a wetter year, interestingly. So yeah, how these interplay is really interesting. In any event, it's interesting from heavy metal precipitation. I know that the opposite is maybe true, but from a lot of these other TDS, this is kind of an interesting phenomena that affects all of us. And all right, yes.
One more question. So the mayor also brought up concrete. And, obviously, yes, it is a lot of concrete, but when I went and toured the water plant, obviously concrete is something that is needed in this kind to handle this kind of treatment, right? So do you have confidence in the newer type of concrete that has lesser carbon emissions or GHG?
Yes, I haven't heard any concerns about the strength of that concrete.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I believe that what we've done in the REACH code, the way that it achieves lower emissions is it pairs the strength needed for the application with the amount of cement in the concrete. So that essentially you're not designing things where you're using stronger concrete than is actually needed for the application.
And I'm just to add, I'm aware that this is a field that's advancing pretty rapidly on improvements in reducing the carbon content of concrete, and some of the more newer materials actually show higher strength. But the is it NIST standards? Whoever the standards have not yet allowed less volume of concrete for, say, structural purposes than was historically the case. In the coming years, they will probably approve what is lower carbon, higher strength concrete.
That's very good. So basically the one who certifies the concrete, the organization, they're not yet ready to say that it's safe.
Well, they know it's just as safe. They haven't allowed for it to be certified as even more safe, basically thinner. And because they're going to be very cautious on adopting new standards and new materials. But that's part of my understanding is on at least certain of the materials that's going through that process. I expect in the coming years, we'll see some of those changes.
As an emerging new item, is the cost going to be higher? Huh? You haven't looked at it. Okay.
So this came up during the bid. So I just wanted to remind our finance committee that we're actually rehabilitating the existing aeration tank. So we're not pouring brand new concrete tanks.
Okay.
There will be some concrete footings for electrical
Oh.
here. I know we're adding, but we're adding walls. We're not adding brand new tanks.
So less than a total rebuild.
Right.
Good.
We're rehabilitating existing
Got it.
within the existing footprint. There's a little auxiliary equipment around the perimeter, but the existing tanks are going to be rehabilitated.
Where there's new concrete piles, new foundations, new walls, new beams inside the tanks to hold it together in an earthquake.
So significant, but probably less than I was assuming. Yes.
Have you invited the other agencies for a walkthrough or a tour? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you.
They get to put their hands in the concrete when it all gets done. Our kids. Yeah. All right. I think that concludes this.
Well, is there a motion?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Move to recommend the
I will second that. Is that clear enough motion? Okay. All in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously. And thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And interesting enough, our partners,